Welcome to Knife Thoughts. This video is going to be my full review of this knife, and this is the TakCom Grunt. So this is a new model from TakCom, and TakCom is the higher end line of knives from Tak Knives, which is also Tak Pro, and now TakCom. And the TakCom knives are ones that I have really come to enjoy. I got to talking with Shane of TakCom and got to meet him at Blade Show and have checked out several of their knives and been really impressed. And one thing right off the bat, these are made by Bestech. Bestech does a lot of OEM work for manual knives, but I didn't know until I saw that was who was making these, that they made automatic knives at all, let alone out the front knives. And this year, I guess last year, 2023, was a big year for me of checking out and reviewing out the front knives because they became decriminalized to carry where I live. So I've checked out several of these knives and been really impressed by the construction that Bestech does. So Shane sent this knife along. It's a new model, like I said, and the idea behind this model is that it is a knife made for first responders and really even military. People who need a knife in a high stress situation, and that is really built into the design. So first of all, with the handle, this is a very different shape than a lot of out the front knives. So you can see it has kind of a traditional knife shape with the palm swell, the guard, the upturn towards the butt here. So that traditional handle shape on this knife gives you a much better grip compared to a lot of out the front knives. You can get a full grip on this. I have a pretty wide hand and I can get a full 4-finger grip without any issue in that main grip area. Now that's as compared to, something like a Microtech Ultratech, which has this very slender handle, which has its own positives. It's very easy to put in your pocket and things like that, but it doesn't have that classic ergonomic feel of a more traditional knife shape. So something like an axial shift, same deal. You can see the slender handle. Now, kind of a counterpoint to that is the Benchmade Shootout. One of the reasons that I decided to get this Benchmade Shootout is because of this similar handle shape to the Grunt that is a little bit more suited towards ergonomics and actually cutting. So to show you a comparison here, you can see that there's a similar amount of grip area, if you're looking at the knives, similar amount of grip area. I will say that the Grunt feels like it has more grip area to me. And I'm not sure exactly why that is. I don't know if it's because there's a little bit of extra area above this guard area and below the butt area, but it does feel like there's a little bit more area to hold on to for me than on the Benchmade Shootout. But if you're familiar with the Shootout, it's a very similar feel to the handle. So also with the handle, it has this checkering pattern to give it some texture, give you a little bit more grip if your hands are wet, whatever, and whatever kind of tactical situation you find yourself in, this might give you a little bit more grip. And interestingly, again, a comparison, a similarity to the Shootout, which has this texturing, versus more traditional out the front type knives like the Ultratech, which has basically no texturing on it other than these jimping areas. So that also kind of goes along with the theme. Now, another thing that goes along with that theme, we'll stick with the handle for now, is this, which is a cord or seatbelt cutter. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you. I really don't have a whole lot of use for this. I hope I don't need a seatbelt cutter. It is something that, really you're gonna use in an emergency situation, which fits right in with the theme of the knife, but it's not something I use a lot. So I can't tell you, how this fares compared to other seatbelt cutters, because I'm just not using seatbelt cutters or cord cutters that often. If I need to cut a piece of paracord, I usually have several knives with me that I can do it with. But if you are someone who's a law enforcement or, you know, an EMS or certainly military, it would be nice to have a sharp edge always with you that you can cut cord with without worrying about cutting. You know, if someone is in a seatbelt in a car, you can use this to cut that seatbelt without at all having to worry about cutting them. So I think that that is a nice feature, again, with the intention, with the intended use that this Grunt has. It's not something I use a lot, but, you know, it's definitely something that's available to you. Now, I think that this lanyard hole also kind of goes along with the theme, but it is a pretty small lanyard hole. I think to get normal paracord through there, it would be easier if you did take the inner threads out. You might be able to get some through without taking the inner threads out, but it's going to be difficult because it is not the you know, widest, well, I guess tallest opening. But you could get other types of cord in for sure if you wanted to have a little bit of a smaller lanyard and make sure that you can, you know, pull it out of your pocket and keep it in hand and all of that. Now moving on to the blade, that's another thing that is, you know, purpose built. So there is another version of this knife, a drop point, kind of a classic drop point that looks really nice also, but this is a sheep foot, and it's not something you see super often on out the front knives, but it is something that makes sense with the intended purpose of this, because again, you can do cuts without having to worry about puncturing, you know, whatever's behind what you're cutting. So if you're cutting, you know, clothes off of someone to get to an injury or anything like that, you can do that a little bit more safely with this sheep foot. So I think that that makes sense to, you know, fit in with the theme. It does have this kind of groove. It looks like a long pull to me, honestly. You know, something like you would see on a traditional knife, a slip joint, but it does look good. And I don't know if it goes along with the theme, but it does look good to me. Now, I talked about how these are made really well, and that is very much the truth. Like any out the front knife, except for like the Hawk Deadlock, there's a little bit of forward and back blade play. There's a little bit of side to side, but it compares really nicely, really favorably with things like a Microtech Ultratech. You can see, you can probably hear there's probably a little bit more play on the Ultratech. Same deal with the Shootout. The Shootout's pretty good, honestly, also, but similar amounts of play. So it definitely compares favorably. Action-wise, it also compares well. So you can see that retraction, and then the Grunt. I would say the Grunt feels a little bit stronger, but it's probably because it does have a bigger, heavier blade, but a great action for sure. I do like the actuator on this knife and really the other. It's similar to other knives from TakCom. The pressure needed to fire it is probably pretty similar to, you know, what you're used to on an out the front knife, an Ultratech, the Shootout. Now, I will say that probably my favorite thing about this original version of the actual shift is that this switch is really easy to actuate. I really wish that more out the front knives were easier to actuate. I think that it's kind of the biggest downside to out the front knives for me is the fact that they're a little overly difficult to actuate. I don't think that these are going to open in your pocket if this was a little bit easier to actuate. Now, would it have a little bit less hard of a, you know, a firing of you know, a kick? Yeah, probably. But I don't really think that would be a huge deal either, as long as it's really consistent. And I think you could have it be consistent with a little bit less strong of a spring in there. But I'm not a knife designer, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not 100% sure of that. Just something that I'd love to see a little bit lighter actions, you know, specifically on the actuator, the switch here, on some out the front knives. But this is a really nicely made knife. It is a large out the front knife. I will show you again some comparisons. Particularly the handle is large. The blade is not super long. The blade's kind of short for the handle length because of this extra space for the seatbelt cutter, and I just think it's a relatively short blade for the handle length, but the handle being tall, it does make it a little bit of a larger out the front knife. But if you are someone who is a first responder, a police officer, law enforcement officer, or an EMS, or in the military, I think that this would make a great option for you if you're looking for an out the front knife. And I think that it's a really well-made knife. It's one I've enjoyed getting to check out. I am not, very tactical, so it's not necessarily something that I have a great need for with the very specific features that it has. But as always, it's a really well-made knife and an interesting design from TakCom. So I really appreciate getting to check it out. As always, I love checking out these out the front knives. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Leave any comments you have below. Check out my website, knifethoughts.com, where I post articles on knives like this and knife-related topics. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.